Hello and welcome to the channel. This is Jerry Talks About It. I'm Jerry, and yes, we're going to talk about it. Now, I wanted to make my first video about another topic, but as you all know, 2020 has given us so much content until you don't really have the flexibility to pick when and what you publish all the time when you're trying to respond to everything that's going on. So, of course, topic number one of the day is the US election. At the time I'm recording this video, it's still up in the air, and we don't know if we have a new president or not yet. One of the questions I want to answer today that I've seen swirling all around the internet is, how is the US scraping so close to the bar, just really dragging our landing gear over the hurdle to remove one of the worst presidents in modern memory? A career white-collar criminal, an absolute pathological liar, and a criminal in so many different other ways. What is it that is causing America a portion of America, to really cling to this candidate? And the angle I'm coming at this topic from today is something I haven't seen analyzed anywhere else. So I wanted to give it to you first. When you take a look at what's underneath Donald Trump's platform, it's not a robust set of policies designed to actually bolster or improve the economy, international trade, business, or any other sector that a president would ordinarily want to measure his accomplishments. What it is really is a set of rules and policies around sort of xenophobic, isolationist, racist platform. An idea that America can harken back to some older, when America was great, back during the time when so many Americans didn't have full access to the privileges that their citizenship afforded. And you have to ask the question at some point, what is it that the people who are voting for this xenophobic platform, what are they receiving in return? And why is it that so many crimes against them, they're so willing to overlook so quickly? And that's because I think a lot of the racism that is exhibited in people is different than the racism exhibited in systems. So I'm going to talk about what's inside of an individual as prejudice, some ideas they have about the mysterious other, and then I want to talk about systemic racism, a system that's really designed to harvest resources on a sort of a tiered level. That's to say that it defines some bottom class and it sets tiers up along the way. And the whole goal of systemic racism is to really suck those resources out of a community, out of an area, to create a surplus or sort of an economic edge for the country or the system that's employing it. So in this case, I think a lot of Trump voters have conflated their own prejudices about the other with the actual goals of systemic racism and extracting those resources. They don't realize that that extraction method, as it passes through each group of others, whether it's brown people of color, whether it's the LGBTQ community, whether it's any other international community where we form an other and we further isolate and divide ourselves, is that eventually, as you peel the layers back, you eventually hit the layer that they're in, and you just have the American people there, and they suffer either through a pandemic, either through economic repercussions. They don't realize that their prejudices aren't necessarily held inside of systemic racism. They have ideas about people and others and fears, whereas the systemic racism has goals around economics and around extracting resources. The real trouble comes in is when you have someone who have these prejudice tendencies. There's also a part that goes along with it. No one ever seems to hold their prejudice in isolation. That's to say that they don't simply not like the other and just move away from the other. it's always paired with some sort of illegality, some sort of crime, some sort of aggression. And throughout history, you see where prejudice doesn't just isolate or separate, it's often manifest in attacks against advances by the other, because the other has to be maintained in its tier. If one tier rises above the other, it disrupts their own internalized view of this system of prejudice. To actually believe that one is superior and then see that your own condition isn't superior to this group that you've been told historically is beneath you or is incapable to perform academically, to see them rise academically or economically, it clashes and creates a sort of existential crisis within an individual where they have to lash out to sort of step back, slow down, and retard the growth of that community. And throughout history, you see multiple massacres and towns are razed where you see these burgeoning economic centers growing out of an African American community that is just skyrocketing after slavery. And it actually requires physical effort from non-deputized people, just the actual people crossing the railroad tracks, going into those other areas and trying to destroy their progress. So when you look at that bit of crime that goes with it, you have to also understand that it's not just any kind of crime. It's not just theft. It's not just discrimination. It's really baking into an individual an idea of preying on people. And when you look at the criminal justice system, some of the most heinous criminals are the ones whose brains have moved past just their own personal greed, and their own objectives are centered around targeting and really preying on other people. These types of crimes that show a serial nature, that show a particular cruelty or proclivity, are always punished harder. Throughout American history, because of our systemic racism that we have going, crimes, these sort of insidious crimes have been allowed to fester and grow. They've been supported, and you have communities that today will say, this isn't a safe place for this other kind of person, because our community will pursue you, will prey upon you in order to ensure that we maintain our little pocket. That's saying your community is unsafe because any one of your members can be the most violent, vile individual that preys on people. Now, when you bake that in and you wrap it in prejudice, it's always targeted at the other. When you have that level of crime associated with preying on others, it never just stays with the others. It's always about training a community to prey on isolated or vulnerable individuals, and you always see that manifest as crimes within their own community aren't fully prosecuted. Details are left out because there's always this need to protect the person in the tier above you. So within racism, there's an old boys group, and not everybody gets to join that. So in a tiered system, you can be in the same in group, but your tier simply be lower than the guy above you. Maybe that person holds an office, they're a senator or what have you. And it means that whatever slight that senator does to you, you have to overlook it in order to further this idea that this senator isn't really a nefarious person and that your community is perfect. You can't have your senators going to jail. You can't have them being prosecuted for these sorts of crimes. So you'll see a situation where someone has trained their mind through racism to prey on a particular other group, but that training applies across groups, and you'll have someone like a Roy Moore who had a notorious history of preying on schoolgirls, have this just vile history of crime, and the voting community will look at those crimes and say, well, he did it, but we can't let our guy down. And they're willing to sacrifice and let down their girls. Now, if you can't protect your children, and there's nothing in you that motivates you to rise above that, then what you're really saying is, what crime is above that? Taking money from a foreign government, lying to the people, not protecting people during a pandemic, those crimes don't matter because your objective is really furthering the idea that your particular group should be at the top of the pyramid and crimes shouldn't apply to you. So you can come to an election where you have a candidate that's blown the dog whistle of racism, and you have millions of people who have been raised with this idea of supremacy for their group, and they can simply not let go of that. And for that, they'll sacrifice anything. 200,000 American lives in a pandemic, they can sacrifice that. The position of the country, they're willing to sacrifice the actual core democratic foundation of an individual casting a vote to elect a president. In one term, you take a guy who's a notorious Republican in name only, who's been Democrat more years than Republican, and have him hijack a party simply because they can't turn down their guy. So, in order to understand what's really happening here, you have to understand that racism and its intrinsic need to prey on individuals and its intrinsic need to suppress justice is in itself its own autoimmune condition. The racists suffer from it because they inflict it, and they can't actually approach it without facing the existential crisis of not actually being superior and admitting that they've been ripped off. And when you see business schemes like this, whether it's multi-level marketing that sells an impossible product to sell, or whether it is a pyramid scheme that actually simply defrauds the investors, there's a pressure to live up to the investor that came before you. You have to make as much money as the company says you can make, or else you're the failure. So in that way, racism says, come join us, look at this long storied history of what we've built, and completely ignore all of the damage that's been done to you over time. So I hope this video helps everyone here in the US and around the world understand how powerful a dog whistle racism is in an election by really understanding the ways that it suppresses that immune response that should be triggered inside someone to lean toward justice. Thanks.